we move to the next presenter, Dr. Jaiprakash Gupta. His paper is on Jhana, Tao or Zen, broadening the scope of Patanjali's Dhyana. Dr. Jaiprakash ji.
Namaskar, everyone. Sorry, it's evening here. It's morning in India. I am aware of that. Let me start with a disclaimer. I am not a Zen Buddhist or a Taoist or have any religious affiliation or bound to any school of yoga. I am not selling or proposing or superimposing any path or any solution. I am like a person walking on a beach by the ocean of knowledge, trying to pick a few seashells that fascinate my scientific curiosity to understanding life. Okay, so I would like to start with a disclaimer. As I said, I'm not a Zen Buddhist or Taoist or have any religious affiliation or bound to any school of yoga. I'm just trying to, I'm not trying to sell anything or propose or superimpose any path or solution. I am like a person walking on a beach by the ocean of knowledge, trying to pick few seashells that fascinate my scientific curiosity to understand life. Just like I share my shell collection with my granddaughter Kalila, and she is amazed, enjoying playing with them. I want listeners to do the same. Be in the moment, and I hope to stimulate curiosity and provide a new dimension in path they have chosen. Next slide, please. As you're aware, there's a voluminous literature on Indic Buddhist philosophy and religious literature. Dating and chronological issues have always been there because Indic Buddhic tradition never has had the historical sense as the Judeo-Christian tradition has. Patanjali Yoga Sutra is, as we are aware, a systematic review of knowledge on Dhyana and other yoga angas up to 2000 BC. That is before Common Era. Between 2000 to 100 CE, Samkhya Yoga and Adidharma school showed interoperability of certain constructs. Knowledge on Dhyana has grown exponentially since Patanjali's seminal work. Next slide, please. The question that came to my mind was, can Buddhist tradition, or both ancient and modern, enhance our understanding on Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga? Did Indic literature thoughts have impact on Buddhism? Was there any impact on stages of or techniques to refine Dhyana? And reference to Dhyana, what are the differences or overlaps between Indian, Chinese, and Japanese philosophers thinking on Dhyana? Next. In this presentation, I'll try to briefly cover a brief historical survey, compare the prerequisites to Dhyana in Indian Buddhist tradition, compare stages of Dhyana and Samadhi. Because I find it's very difficult to separate them, and I'd rather see it as a nexus, as a continuum, and include some neurocognitive, neuroanatomical, and neurophysiological changes which were noted. And then the role of Abhinav Gupta, the work which I found a bit fascinating. I'll just have a small mention of it. And then influence of Zen on world culture, and new concepts, and some key concepts which are important to be understood. And then I'll finally close with a gaps and suggestions for future research. Next. Etymologically, as we know, I think there's already been spoken a lot before, so I won't go in detail, but we know the root is from Indo-European root de, which is look, and in Vedic tradition, it is more like an imaginative vision or dhyana, to contemplate. The same word has, when it moved to China and Japan, took very different phonetics. In China, it became like Chagong or Chang or Shong. And in Zen, in Japan, it became Zenshu, which is short form for Zen, or school of Zen, which is Zen. Now, Dhyana is more closely related, according to what I feel, towards Nibbana in Pali, or Nirvana, and Dharana, then to Dharana, which is, that's why I prefer the next is, as I said, between Dhyana and Samadhi. Dhyana, as it has been previously spoken, is not only meditation or attention or focus or mindfulness, concentrate. It is more than that. And that's why, just like we don't have words to pick the semantic depth of this word, I would suggest that we use Dhyana, just like we use Nirvana or Samadhi. Thank you. Next. Briefly, I could break historically. We know that development of Vedic and pre-Vedic and post-Vedic development of this concept was highly seen between up to the time of Patanjali, where he has summarized the whole thing. And the evidence of this and some of its influence in the Pali stages around 400 can be seen. Next. This concept moved from India to China via the Silk Route, where there were far more translation before it went to China. And then like with Fazain and other, well, it's only in like around 400 CE where Bodhidharma, who was the first one to take it there in terms of structural, where we actually saw the school of Buddhist influence. Buddhist is established in China. And then came, and along with Taoism, with Lao Tzu's, it became a second phase, which I found was very crucial, which was around between 100 to 200 CE. Next slide. Next slide. And this is the, and from China, it's generally only around 1,000 plus CE, there was a major shift in terms of Zen Buddhism, where several schools came into being, like Renzai and Zazen and Fuxi, and we'll go into that in a little late detail, but more focused on Zen aspect. Next slide, please. Next, yeah. Now, why did this whole philosophy of Dhyana or Patanjali Yoga, and in terms what we find in terms of Ashtanga Yoga and in terms of Buddhist, we see, as Patanjali has said, I mean, it is basically to eliminate the experience of dukkha. Dukkha is not only suffering, which is commonly translated, it is any afflictions, as I've given in the definition, it's any afflictions away from natural state, which is the natural state of a being, or Drishte Swarupa Avastha, which Patanjali calls. So it has been loosely translated into suffering, unhappiness, pain, dissatisfaction, stress, etc. So the premises are same, both in terms of in yoga and in Buddhism. You need solution for this dukkha, and in Patanjali he describes them into three types, which is Adi Adhyatmic, Adi Bhautik, and Adi Daivik. And they are more because of the kleshas, and they could be like depression, procrastination, laziness, and these are the qualities which he qualifies that you will need to go take yoga as a practice. And in Buddhism also similar roots are seen, as I've shown in the slide, that the 10 samyojanas, which they call, which is the belief in like permanent self, skeptical, obsession, sensuous craving, hatred, and those are the elements which we find have been the cause of dukkha, and they need to be released. Next slide. Basically, we know that Buddhism is divided into two main groups, into Hinyan and Mahayana group. So, and they are very similar in terms of their teaching. The paths are different. Theravada is more of what they call the hara, the listener, the follower. They just follow the teachings of Buddha. Whereas Mahayana is more into bodhisattva, where they try to attain Buddhahood, not just follow the ritualistic part of it. And there's quite elaborate techniques in that, which I will not go into detail. And the co-practices between the two, Anapasti meditation and Vipassana is more emphasized by Hinayana, which is the Theravada school, whereas Mahayana is more into Vipassana and more into thought control and Dhyana, basically. Next slide, please. Because of shortage of time, I'm just going to skip through some of the main, give you some main broad, high-level mapping. As in yoga, we have this eightfold system, the yama niyama, which are the observance and controls, and then asana and pratyahara, pranayama, which are the external forms and external controls which we can have. And there is the antaryanga one, which is the internal control, which is pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, which is basically concentration, control of senses, and more internal processes. And yama niyama are basically very commonly as a prerequisites to going to the next stages. And they can be mapped very easily to most of the Four Noble Truths, which is the foundation of Buddhism. And the fourth of the Four Noble Truths is the eightfold path, where he talks about the right view, right understanding, right speech, right actions, and these are very common. And as you can see broadly in terms of their constructs, they can be very easily mapped to the thoughts of Ashtanga Yoga, and they can be related. Samadhi is very clear, and even the quality of speaking, right speaking, right work, they are very easily mapped to the concepts which Patanjali has laid. Can you go to the next slide, please? Next. Similarly, in terms of the stages of Samadhi, as we know, Dhyana and Samadhi, I mean, they are very closely linked, according to me. And there's very poor definitions, or I mean, definitions are there, but in terms of linking and separating them becomes a problem. In yoga, we know there are two types of samadhis which Patanjali talks about. One is a samaprajna samadhi and one is asamaprajna samadhi. And they are basically in terms of their whether you use object as your focus or you don't use object as your focus. Similarly, in Buddhism, they break Dhyana into two major groups, what they call a Rupa Dhyana and Arupa Dhyana. Rupa Dhyana is very similar to Patanjali's Samaprajna Samadhi, where there is a focus on objects, and then at different stages, different levels of object stages are mentioned, and they are very distinct. I won't go into the detail because of the shortage of time. And I have mapped this where I'm quite happy to share the slide and we can think about it. Next slide, please. In terms of development of those stage, I mean, the Samadhi, which different stages of Dhyana, which are spoken in Buddhism, we do not find a very good analysis in terms of what stages are involved. Patanjali doesn't talk of stages. He just says in terms of, okay, these are the 8 angas and you have to achieve. Whereas in Buddhism, I found they are very systematic, starting right from your yama niyamas, which we have, like establishing practices, and then stoppage or overcoming the minds in terms of thought, in terms of object, in terms of breathing, in terms of controlling. And then in terms of further division, I think in Dhyana, in Buddhism, you find more specific definitions in terms of breaking them into like the later stages of Dhyana. There is a breakdown in terms of exclusive attention and mental placy and pacifying senses. And so there are very distinct markers which I find we can, which has taken focus of the work of Patanjali into more details, which I find fascinating in Buddhism. Next slide, please. Coming to the different models, we can see, I mean, there's a lot of evidence in terms of modern research which has been done in terms of meditation. So we have in terms of like focused attention and open monitoring and self-regulation. These are the more terms which are used in modern psychology and in terms of research. And there has been a lot of research into both in terms of neuropsychology and neurophysiology and neuroanatomy. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next. These are very specific components which I've done some analysis. And let's go into the next slide where there's an image. Here you can see between the different types of like focus attention and versus distributed meditation, and you can see very clear. This is one of the very latest paper where you can see that actually measures, and you can actually measure different stages of concentration, dhyana, and in terms of novice practitioner and non-novice practitioner. Because of shortage of time, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but the references are there. Can we go to the next slide? I'll skip this basic concept and let me, there are some concepts which are very in terms of causality, which is very important in Buddhism, and which is basically, as we know, Buddhism doesn't believe in God or in terms of metaphysical phenomena, anatma, which is not unself, because everything is causal. They believe, there's a belief that if there is effect, there has to be a cause will have an effect, and effect and cause are interrelated, which is very different from in terms of yoga, where we have the principles of Purusha and Prakriti, and the guna models come into play. Next slide, please.
Sir, can you kindly place your
Yes, can we go to the next slide, the last slide, please? Next. So these are the various concepts, and in terms of influence of Zen, as we know, I mean, there's quite a lot of impact of Zen on its culture. So in terms of the Kon, the haiku, the bonsais, the ikebanas, and it has infused their lifestyle, and they use dhyana in very practical approach. Next, please. In terms of future research, I think what what I have understood so far is we lack a very systematic review of Dhyana concept in terms of its construct and in different traditions in the world, and differences and similarity between them. And more work can be done in terms of actually breaking down into very specific components. And more scientific research could probably help us in breaking down and understanding the very specific outcomes of these stages, and mapping the stages and bringing them to a better outcome based in terms of staging and practicing and in training. As you know, in Renzai school, they say it takes up to 30 years, and they have a very systematic program in terms of when you become a Zen master. It can take up to 30 years. And they have a very systematic program and a progress chart in which they can monitor that. So I think that level of specificity is required. So sorry about this technological problem, and I'm happy to share and discuss those who are interested in this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for that interesting point that you brought out, that the need to bring about the concordance. So it's very important to compare and bring in the concordances to connect and understand or map the concept of Dhyana across disciplines. I'm sorry, because of the shortage of time, you have to proceed further. Nagaraj, any comments?
Not much. The paper was focusing on the categories and terminology on the Buddhist side also. Though the whole conference is focusing on the Hindu side, the Vedic side, the title of the paper says expanding the scope. Only there is some, I think, scope for difference of opinion. There is no need for any expanding. It is already expanded. The expansion is already there. The paper, I think, is doing identifying the expandedness, identifying the already existing connections, and I think the paper is still with the Buddhist biased way of understanding Dhyana, Shan, and all these aspects. So probably more of these conferences will help people, scholars like Dr. Jaiprakash to understand that there is no need for any expansion. The whole field is broad. The whole connections are already existing, and how to connect them from the Buddhist side to the Vedic side, vice versa. All this, there is a need to identify more connections, more intricately, more rigorously, is well taken. That much is well taken. Thank you very much.
There are a couple of comments here, but I'll just mention about it and then move ahead. A couple of our later paper presenters like Meg Kalyanji and Shilpa Panditji, they have made observations, and they say that they will respond to certain points presented by Dr. Jai Gupta in their presentations. So we look forward to those responses.